Hi, and welcome to our live training. In this live training, we're going to take a look at extending the survival shooter or nightmares project, which is available for free from the asset store. We're using the version that's been upgraded to Unity 5, which you can grab if you want to follow along. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a weapons shop to the game. So the game is a shooting game where the player has a machine gun type weapon. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and add a location in the game where the player can walk to, and then that will pause the game and bring up a screen in which the player can select from a couple of different weapon types, which the player will purchase with in-game currency. Now, what we're going to use to do this is something called scriptable objects. Now, I am not going to be able to give an in-depth explanation of what scriptable objects are in this training. If you would like to learn more about them, my colleague Adam Buckner has an excellent hour-long training just about the ins and outs of them and what they are. We're simply going to use them. But the very short version of what a scriptable object is it's a asset that stores data. So very often we might store data in a class. We might have a number of variables in a class which would contain their values, and we could access those values. But for example, that data, when we stop playing in the editor, will be reset to whatever values are in the inspector or are stored in the class. And in this case, what we can do is we can read and write data from a scriptable object, which is an asset, meaning because it's an asset, it's not going to be reset when we stop playing. So for example, if you ever work with materials, you can play your scene, tweak your material, and because it's an asset, the changes won't be reset. So we're kind of using scriptable objects in this way so that we can create a container for some data and edit that data if we want at runtime and have those changes persist. Really, we're just using them because this is kind of a nice way to store data, and I figured this would be a cool opportunity just to show you one way of using scriptable objects in practice. So there's going to be a tiny bit of editor scripting to go with this. If you haven't done editor scripting before, the script we're going to use is really simple, so don't worry about it too much. And it's actually a script that's from Adam's earlier training. So if you want to go back and kind of see his thinking about that, you can. I'm just going to use it wholesale because we're going to need an editor script to create the scriptable object asset files. And so let's actually start with that. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a class called weapon object. And weapon object is going to, well, first of all, for those of you who haven't seen the game, let's just take a really quick look at the game. So as you can see, we've got a player that can move around. We've got these kind of hordes of enemies coming at us. And you got to survive for as long as you can. You get a score. And so we're going to use that score as a currency and allow the player to upgrade their weapons, hopefully survive a little longer. And so to get the scriptable objects working that are going to store our different weapon types, I think we'll make 3 weapons. We're going to need 2 things. We're going to need a class called weapon object, which is going to define what data we can store in the scriptable object. And then we're going to need an editor script, which is going to create the actual asset file in our project. So let's start by creating the class weapon object, and then we'll create the editor script to create files containing that data. So let's go ahead and create a folder. Call it weapon shop. And then in there, I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call it weapon object. Let's open that up in our script editor, zoom in. All right, so the first thing that we need to add here is the system.serializable attribute. I'm not going to go into what serialization is. There's a fairly in-depth discussion of it in Adam's scriptable objects live training. But basically, in this case, we just want to make sure that our weapon object is serializable, and we are going to, this is going to be, it's going to inherit from the base class scriptable object. So this is not a mono behavior, right? Nor a lot of the scripts that we're working with are mono behaviors. This is not. It inherits from scriptable objects, so it's a scriptable object. So we can actually delete, start and update, since we don't use those in scriptable objects. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to define the fields that can be stored in a weapon object. So we're going to have a public string called weapon name. And I'm just going to put weapon name here. This is the placeholder string for now. We're going to have a public int called cost. This is how much the weapon is going to cost to buy. Initialize that to 50. We're going to have a public string called description. This is going to be shown on the button. The name and the description are both going to be shown on the button along with the cost when we're in the store getting ready to buy it. So we can store that information in the scriptable object and then recall it and put it in the button when it's time to give the player a choice. And then we're going to now, so those are kind of display fields that we're going to use for the button. These are going to be the actual meat and potatoes. So we're going to have a public float called fire rate. We're going to set that to equal half a second. And so this is going to be used by the player firing class, player shooting. Anytime the player shoots, it's now going to check, instead of checking a local variable in the script, it's going to check the currently loaded weapon object to see how fast it should shoot. And we'll modify that script in a sec. And then we're going to have a public int called damage. That's going to be equal 10. And we're going to have a public float called range, which is going to be equal 100. So how far, so damage is how much damage is deducted from the enemy when we shoot them, and the range is how far we can shoot. And so we're going to use these three variables to kind of make like a slow, long-range, heavy weapon, a short-range, fast-firing, light weapon, and our default weapon, right? So kind of pretty standard video game weapon options. And that's all we need in weapon object, right? That's all the data that we're going to need to store in there. So let's save that, jump back over to the editor, and now we're going to create our editor script, and that's going to be called make weapon object. So we're going to go create C# script. We're going to call this make weapon object. Now this is also not going to be a mono behavior. This is just a regular C# class because it's going to, it's an editor script, right? It's not actually going to be used in game. All right, and what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure we're using the namespace Unity editor, right? So this is going to allow us to give commands to the editor and do things in the editor. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a public static function that returns void called create weapon object. We could just call it create. Let's call it create just so it's not so similar to the class name. And what we're going to do is we're going to say this function is going to be called via the menu item assets, create weapon object. So we're going to be able to go to our assets menu that we know and love, and when we choose this item that we're adding to it, it's going to call this piece of code here, this function. So then we want to have a variable of the type weapon object, which we'll call asset, and we're going to set that to equal scriptable object dot create instance, right? So we're calling the create instance function and passing it the generic parameter weapon object. So create instance can be used to create a new instance of our class weapon object in the variable asset. And then we're going to call asset database dot, asset database dot create asset. So now we're starting to interact with the assets in our project. So we're going to create a new asset and we're going to pass it the object, right, which is going to be the asset that we just defined, and a path. And we'll just say assets new weapon object dot asset. So in top level of our project, we're going to create an asset called new weapon object dot asset using the asset that we just declared. And then we're going to call asset database dot save assets. So we're going to save the asset that we just created. And then just kind of for fun, not strictly necessary, we're going to call editor utility dot focus project window, which is going to bring the editor's focus to the project window. And then we're going to say selection dot active object equals asset, so that we can just highlight it in the project window once it's being created. And that is the end of our editor script. So nice and simple. You know, editor scripting can seem a little intimidating. It's a new API with some new functions and stuff, but it's really not that hard, and it's pretty powerful. A lot of the tools and stuff that you may have checked out on the asset store are all created with editor scripting, and the fact that you can extend the editor in this way is one of the really powerful things about Unity. So, you know, if you're interested, check it out. We're going to save that, and now if we jump back over to the editor, let's make sure we have no errors, everything compiled okay, hooray. And then we're going to go assets, create, and look at this. We have our weapon object now as an option in that menu thanks to our make weapon object script that we wrote. So we're going to select that as an option, and we can see, did it work? Yeah. So now we've got selected our new weapon object. So we've created a new file, which is a scriptable object of the type weapon object. And now we have these fields that we can edit in the inspectors. So let's call this one, we'll call this one light, and we'll set the cost maybe to be, we'll keep it at 50. The description will be light, fast weapon, low damage, short range. And the fire rate will be maybe 0.1. The damage, let's make the damage also maybe we'll make it 2. And we'll make the range like really short, like 20. We'll change the name of the scriptable object as well. We'll call it light. This is important because the way our make weapon object class works, if it had the same name, it would actually just overwrite it. It wouldn't warn us or anything. So with great power comes great responsibility, right? So now let's make another one. We'll go assets, create weapon object, and we'll call this one heavy. Cost will be 100. Heavy damage, long range, slow rate of fire. And the fire rate will be maybe 1, but the damage will be, let's make it 100, and the range, yeah, we'll keep it at 100. That seems good. Okay, so now we've got our 2, and we'll call this heavy. So we'll have these 2 plus the default weapon. So now, there we go. So now we just need to use these, right? So we are going to make some modifications to the completed player shooting class. So I'm using the completed scene here, right? So let's go ahead and click on the player, and we'll expand the player. We'll go to gun barrel end, which I believe is where player shooting is. Yeah, and double click on player shooting to open it in MonoDevelop. And what we're going to do is we are going to make some changes. The main thing that we're going to do here is we're going to add an array of weapon objects. So we've got all these variables. What we're going to do is we're going to add a public weapon object array called weapons. And then we're going to add a public int called current weapon and set it to equal 0. So now instead of referencing, let's say, time between bullets up here, we're going to reference the fire rate of our weapon object. So now we just need to go through and make some tweaks to our script. So here, right, where we see we're checking if the fire button is pressed and the timer, the time between bullets has elapsed, right? We've waited long enough to fire again. We will shoot. So what we'll say is, instead of just checking the local variable, we'll say weapons, current weapon. So whatever is at the current weapon slot in the array dot fire rate, right? So we're just going to reuse this a few times. So we're going to replace it here. And then we're going to call the shoot function. And in shoot, we have a range for our ray cast, right? So we're casting a ray into the scene to see if the enemy is in range of the bullet. And here again, we're going to do the same thing. We'll just say weapons.currentWeapon.range. I'm just pasting that in. And I think there's 1 or 2 other spots where we need that. We need to do damage per shot as well. So here, if the enemy health, so if we raycast and hit something that does have an enemy health script attached, enemy health does not equal null, we're going to call the take damage function and pass in damage per shot as the damage parameter. And so again, I'm just going to do current weapon dot damage, right? So really simple modifications. Here, range. I need to replace range down here as well. To that script, basically just saying, yeah, pull from this array for those variables instead of using the local variables. And I think that's all I need to modify in there. I'm sorry that I'm not going to go through this whole script right now. There is a complete project on how this is created, so feel free to check that out if you want to learn how this script is working. But basically, when you click, it casts a ray, and if the ray hits something, it deals damage to it. And we're just going to, instead of using the local variables, we're going to use the ones from the array. So now, you know what? I should actually make one more. Let me just look at the default values here. What was it? The range. Range is 120.15 and a range of 100. So let me make one more weapon for the default weapon. Let's go assets, create, just so we can have 3. And this will be default. We might nerf this a little bit. We'll call this default. We'll just call it medium. The cost could be 50. Description, medium range, damage, and fire rate. And so the fire rate, 0.15 before. Let's make it a little slower. We'll make it 0.3. The damage could stay the same. And the range will get nerfed to 50. I think that'll be okay. Okay, and now if we go back to gun barrel end, we'll see our player shooting now has this weapons array, and we're going to put our objects into it. So let's add default as the 0th element. Then it doesn't really matter. We'll do, whoops. And so the current weapon in this case is set to 0, right? So the default weapon is going to be the initial thing until we change it. And so let's give that a quick test. So we can change the weapon, right, by changing the current weapon number. Nice. That was crazy. Anyway. We could obviously tweak this to make this look a little better. Now. But you get the idea, right? So we've got our, and obviously we could include other variables in there, like maybe to render a different effect, make the thing a different color, play a different sound effect. We could put all those things into our scriptable object and call them the same way, right? And so that gives us our switchable weapon capability, right? What we need now is to add our shop capability, right? So we've got the weapon part, we need the shop part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add to our scene a cube, and let's put it over here under this. Make it a little higher, maybe make it a little bigger. It might be too big. Let's make it like 2 by 2 by 2. I'm gonna put it under this stool over here, and just put it on top of the ground roughly. That looks pretty good. Whoop, it's not quite in the right place. Put it squarely under the stool. Yeah, that'll work. All right, and then what we're going to do, just to make it pretty, we're going to add a material. There's a glow-in-the-dark star material that I'm going to throw on there. And then I'm just going to quickly, I'm going to flag it static, right? So we can incorporate it in our light maps. We're going to call this shop cube. Let's flag it to static, navigation static as well. I'm just flagging the whole thing to static. And then we're going to rebuild our lighting so that we can have this emissive material emit some pretty light on our scene. And we don't need to wait while that's happening. That's going to bake in the background. And now, so we've got the weapon behavior. What we need now is our shop behavior. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a canvas with some buttons. And so let's go ahead and we're going to create a game object, UI, canvas, and we'll call this shop canvas. And we're going to add to it, first of all, a panel. Boop. Let's go into 2D mode so we can actually see what we're doing here. A panel. Whoa, zoom way out. Focus that, which I'm going to make smaller using the anchors. Let's anchor it at maybe 15 on that side, 15%, 15%, and then what's that, 23%? Yeah, why not? That should be okay. So now we've set the anchors. Now we just need to zero out the positions. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Good. And I'm just going to steal from, there's a pause panel in here somewhere, menu canvas, pause panel. There's an image element that my colleague Pete Lee made for this to make it look nice. I'm going to paste component values just to give it that nice purple look. And this is going to be shop panel. And we're going to add some children to it. We're going to add a child, actually, which is going to be a button. The button's going to get the same image treatment. We'll paste the component values for that. But it's going to have a different shape. And actually, we're going to control the shape using the shop panel. We're going to add a horizontal layout group. So this is a really easy way to get things to fit together. Right now, there's only one, so it's taking up the whole thing. But once we start adding more buttons, it will just fit them to fit the button, fit the shape of the panel, and line them up nicely. And we're going to make it maybe 60, 60, 60, not 600, 60, 60. That might be too much from the top and bottom, maybe 30, 30. So just to give it a little padding from the top and the bottom, and then we'll give it a little, maybe 15 spacing between the button elements. You can see this in action if I duplicate it. You can see now we have two nice buttons there. And you see they are spaced nicely and so on. So if you don't know about those layout groups, definitely check those out. It makes creating UI a whole heck of a lot easier. And now in our button, there's a text element. And I'm again going to reuse from the menu canvas. We've got this. Let's get quit button text. We're just going to copy the text properties here. Copy component from the text object attached to our quit button and paste it. This is just because this text is already styled. It's got a font, size, color, etc. There's actually a shadow as well, so let's get that. Copy the shadow component. The shadow is just like a little style thing that we can add to UI elements to give it a little drop shadow. There we go. All right. So this is not going to be quit. This is going to be, we can just call this weapon button. And the text will put weapon name. And this will be name text. And we're going to actually use the same trick. We're going to add a vertical layout group to the button. So now if I add more text elements, they're going to fill the thing vertically. So now we're going to make cost text and description text. And you can see those are getting like spaced nicely and stuff. We're going to make them smaller. This is going to be 16. The cost will be 16, and the description will be 14. This might end up being too small, or maybe 12. It might be too small, but I'm going to give it a try for now. Okay, now we've got our button. We've got some text for it. We're going to finish this button, and then we'll duplicate it for the others. Now I'm going to do a little scripting just so I don't have to fill these manually, so we can have this be a little bit dynamic. So what we're going to do, we are going to pull the values from the array that's attached to the player. You could obviously have like a singleton with this stuff, like a all weapons or weapon manager singleton or whatever. I just stuck it directly on the player because it felt easy at the time. So we're going to make a script called display weapon. Let's just call it maybe weapon button, I think is a better name. And that's going to be new script, create and add. Let's open that up. So this is going to be a mono behavior. And so for that reason, we want to make sure we're going to use the namespace completed project so it can interoperate with our other, where'd it go? So it can interoperate with our other classes, namely player shooting. So we're going to put this in the namespace complete project. And shaboop doop. There we go. All right, so we're going to have some public variables here. We're going to have a public variable of the type player shooting called player shooting that we're going to use to get the values from the array. So we're going to reference the player shooting script that has the array in it. And then again, we're going to have a weapon number. We're going to have a public int called weapon number. So we're going to set this in the inspector to say which weapon we want to display here. And that'll be different for each button. Then we're going to have a public shop controller. Actually, I can't put that in yet. Let me do that. I'll do that in a minute. I'll add that so we can open and close the shop. We're going to have a public text. Now notice I can't type text because I need to add the namespace using UnityEngine.UI. And that's so I can access the members of the UI namespace and use classes like text. And so we're going to have a public text called name, a public text called cost, a public text called description. So these are references to the text objects, right, that we created attached to the button. And then we're going to have a private audio source called source, which I haven't added to the button yet. Let's actually add that now so I don't forget. This is just going to play a little sound when you try to buy something that you don't have money for. So just give you a little like negative feedback. You can't do that. And okay, so in start, what we're going to do is we're just going to say source equals get component audio source, right? So we're just going to get a component reference to the audio source. This is kind of like not that important, but you know, UI design, good to have sounds in there. And then we're going to call this function, private function that returns void called set button. So set button is going to set the text and stuff for the button based on the weapon number. So we're going to call set button, and in set button, it's nice and simple. I'm just going to, first of all, because the text for cost takes a string, and I have the cost as a float, I'm going to say string, I'm just going to declare a string cost string, and that's going to be equal to player shooting dot, weapon number. Oh, whoops, no, I'm doing this wrong. Player shooting dot weapons, weapon number, dot cost dot toString, right? So I'm just going to convert that float to a string so I can display it. And then we're just going to say name dot text. So the text object, text field is going to be this dot name. And I'm just going to copy this. Wait, is that right? Dot. Yeah. And then we just copy this. This is going to be cost dot cost, and description is going to be description. Oh, sorry, this is not going to be that. This is going to be, string is going to be equal to cost string, because I already turned that into a string. Oh, you know what? I don't even need this. Never mind. I forgot I did this. I think this is the easier way to do it anyway. Just take cost. I forgot I changed this afterwards. We're going to add a $sign to it. So that's going to build it into a string anyway. Maybe not the fastest way to do it, but in this case, it's fine. Don't do that like in your update loop or anything. Doing it once per button click is fine, but the string operation could get expensive. And then we're going to have a public So that's just going to set the text fields for the button, right? And then we're going to, when on start. And then we're going to have a public void called onClick. And now we're going to say if score manager dot score is greater than or equal to this. Meaning we have enough money in the bank, right, to buy the thing. Then we're going to say score manager dot score minus equals our cost. Player shooting dot current weapon now equals weapon number, right? So the weapon number that was set in the button is now going to be the weapon that we're using. And we're going to call shop controller dot close shop, but I haven't written shop controller yet, so we're not going to do that. And then if we couldn't afford it, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to say else source dot play. So we're going to just play our sound to say you can't do that. So let's give that a test real quick. I'm going to save, I'm going to jump over to the editor, and now we've got these fields. So let's set our name text, cost text, description text. Let's set it to weapon number 1, right? So we can actually change to a weapon. I'm going to drag a reference to the gun barrel end player shooting script so we can access that array that we need to access. And okay. So now, right now it's not pausing, right? So right now we've got our kind of slow weapon. And of course I forgot to set the button. Let me actually turn down my audio so I'm not talking over it. I want to add an onClick event to our button so that we can call the onClick function of weapon button. And the way I'm going to do that, so I'm going to say plus, add an event, drag in. The event I'm going to call is on weapon button, and it is in weapon button, and it is called onClick. So now when I click it, that function that we defined for onClick is going to happen. Destroy it. Oh, the menu canvas is inactive. Let's see. Okay, now it's working. Okay. Okay. Anyway, at least I can click on it. So let's do the let's add the shop code. Our shop controller. It's really simple. Just to show and hide the appropriate panels. So on our shop cube, we're going to add a new script called shop controller. And open it up. And then we're going to have a public canvas called shop canvas. And then we're going to add a void ontriggerenter to open the shop when we walk over to it. So we're gonna set the shop to be a trigger in the editor. Let's do that now because I'll forget. Set the collider for our cube to be a trigger so that when we can walk into it and it'll pause the game and show the shop. And so we're going to say if other.gameObject.compareTag player. So if the thing that triggered this is the player, we're going to call a function called openShop, which isn't written yet. So we're going to say void. This has got to be public void. Oh, actually, no, this can be private. Void openShop, because the only way to open this will be by triggering. And then we're going to call that. Burp, derp. There we go. So we're going to call openShop, and then in openShop, we're just going to say shop canvas dot enabled equals true. And time dot timescale equals 0. And actually, it occurs to me I should probably, if I was being a good person, I would connect this to the pause manager script that's in there and call pause void close shop. And then we're going to have a public function called close shop that just does the opposite. Shop canvas.enabled equals false. And time.timescale equals 1. Super simple. And then we just need to call that when we open. Oh, we don't have a exit button yet. So we'll call it when we want to close the shop. For now, the shop canvas should be disabled, the canvas component. We'll drag a reference to our shop cube. And now when I walk to that cube, that sweet glowing cube, we should rotate that a little bit so it looks nicer, right? Looks a little bit terrible right now. Let's rotate it. Oops, not that way. 45 on the Y. Ooh, ah. Okay, now it's pausing. What's the problem here? The problem is that the menu canvas is not enabled. All right, let's do this differently. I'm going to make this a public game object. And make it shop panel. And call set active. Okay. So now, yeah, we'll just keep the nested canvas, but do that. And drop this in there, and that should be fine. Let's see. There we go. I don't know why it's showing up down there, but okay, that's fine. We're going to need to add an exit button. Oh, this shouldn't have a position, this canvas. Is this going to break if I do that? Probably. Maybe not. Let's see. The canvas was offset. I don't want it to be offset. There we go. Okay, better. All right, so now let's add our extra buttons. So this is going to be weapon button 1, 2, 3. So this, we're just going to change the weapon number. That's going to be, it should be 0 now. 0, 1, and 2. And then this will be not a weapon button, but an exit. And we'll remove the weapon button, and we'll just write in manually what these are. So this is going to be exit. And we'll say, leave that blank. And this will be return to game. And what this button is going to have an on-click event calling shop cube and shop controller close shop. So we're just going to directly call that public function from that button. Now, yeah, those are fine. Weapon button. Yep, good. All right, that should work. Let's just make sure it looks okay. Yes, it does. See, that's what's nice about our layout group, right? Is that it gives us that nice resizes the buttons to fit. There we go. Okay, so now I can't buy any of these because I don't have any money, but now we can exit and return to the game. Okay, so it seems to be working. So let me get some money and buy something. Ooh. Oh, this is going to be hard. I nerfed the main gun too hard. The nerf is real. Okay, so now I've got 50. Oh, danger, danger. Okay, we're going to buy the default gun. We can see our score got decremented. Exit. Oh, why did I buy the default gun, by the way? Duh. That was the dumbest test ever. Okay. Oh, this default gun is terrible, too. Trash gun. Okay, actually, but here's a good example of where scriptable objects are cool. The default gun is too trash right now. Let's put the damage up to 50. Range is fine. Maybe we'll make the cost 0 just because you start with it. We can say you already have it. Bow, 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 take that. So notice, right, I'm able to edit in play mode, but what you'll see, because it's a scriptable object, is that by doing that, now we got some money. Let's go get our more powerful gun. Well, let's get the light gun, actually. And actually, we should call close shop when we do that. So let's exit. Bah, 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 bah. Anyway, we can see that it's working. This gun is trash too. Too weak. Okay, let's edit it. So we'll go light. Let's double the damage. The damage is 2. Let's make that 10. There we go. Take that, you animals. Rah. The jukes, the jukes. Let's buy another gun. Get the heavy gun this time. Bow, 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 and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. So, it works. And I'm going to exit play mode and take a look at our light gun there. As you can see, the values are persisting, right? So, pretty cool. Let's just make a little tweak to all of our, we'll highlight all our buttons, and we're just going to add another on-click event with the shop cube, and that's just going to be to close the shop. Actually, we probably don't want to do that because no, I'm not going to do that actually. Let's highlight that and delete it, because if you didn't have enough money, you wouldn't want to close the shop, right? So that's fine. So there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful for you. And thanks very much for watching.